Here's Trent Horn to give some bad advice about talking to atheists.
So there I would say an atheist, just if I'm talking with someone, and I think most atheists would agree with this, they would say, look, I don't believe in God because I don't see any good reasons to think God exists. Okay, then it sounds like what you're looking for are good reasons.
I don't believe in God because I don't understand what God is, or what it means to say that a God exists. So what I'm looking for is not only good reasons to believe that a God exists, but first and foremost, a definition of a God and an explanation of what it means to say that one exists, which I can recognize as coherent. I need to have that before I can even discern what would constitute good reasons to believe in such an entity's existence. Before I know what a God is, I'm not even capable of discerning what would constitute good reasons for believing in one from bad reasons for believing in one.
And so here, we've talked about the arguments for contingency and kalam.
Mm-hmm. I'm familiar with those arguments, and they make no sense to me whatsoever.
But I think that sometimes, our listeners to this may say, well, I don't know those arguments under my fingertips. What am I supposed to do in these circumstances? I would ask questions.
Yeah.
And so one question I would ask here is, okay, so why should I believe there are no good reasons to believe in God?
This question assumes that the atheist with whom one is interacting has made the claim that there are no good reasons to believe in God. Trent seems to be assuming that the atheist is trying to convince the theist of their position. I've never done that. I've never tried to convince a theist that there is no God, or even that there are no good reasons to believe in God. I don't know what a God is, or what it means to say that one exists. Maybe there is a coherent definition of God, and maybe there is good evidence to believe that one exists, and I simply haven't heard that definition or seen that evidence. I'm not trying to contradict or proselytize to any person who says otherwise. I just try to explain why I don't believe in a God. Trent seems to assume that if a theist encounters an atheist, that atheist is trying to proselytize on behalf of atheism.
Well, you prove it to me. Well, I've heard the different reasons, and I have a different reasons to believe in God that may not be a good reason to you, but there's lots of different reasons. Can you help me see why should I believe there are no good reasons? Why should I?
Another question I've heard you ask, and you might be getting to this, is, and I think this is an excellent question, they'll say, I don't believe in God because I've never encountered any good arguments for God's existence. And you say, okay, well, there's a lot of arguments for God's existence. Which do you think is the best one? Obviously, you think it still fails, but out of all of the arguments you've clearly assessed, which is the best one and why does it fail?
Given that the first reason why I don't believe in God is because I don't understand what a God even is, or what it would mean to say that such an entity exists, all the arguments for God which I have heard are incoherent as best I can tell. I can't really rank them because it's not as though there are degrees of incoherence. An idea is either coherent or it's not. The closest thing to an argument for God that I find convincing is not really an argument for God per se, but rather an argument for the acceptability of believing in God, and that's William James's will to believe argument. James said that if a person finds a belief to be compelling, it is acceptable for them to believe in it as long as they only act on that belief at their own risk. Apologists, however, try to get others to adopt their beliefs, which is not exactly acting on those beliefs at their own risk alone. They are trying to convince others to take that risk as well.
That one meets with a fair amount. It depends on who I'm talking to.
That's a good question.
Yeah, you'd think so.
But it's a good question, and it may not work well, but the point is it often exposes that the atheist really hasn't, I mean, not always, but I think there are many atheists who really haven't looked into arguments for God's existence, and their response to that question
there's few that will tell me because I could answer it in reverse to them. I would say the strongest argument against God is the problem of evil.
Yeah,
but here's why I don't find it to be compelling. Here's why I don't find it ultimately compelling to me. I've had atheists when I've put it forward, I've heard say there is no best argument. They're all bad. I'm like, well,
give me one of the better ones.
Yeah, they're all equally terrible. I mean, that doesn't seem right. Most philosophical positions that people hold, there can be better or worse arguments. There are better and worse arguments for atheism.
Well, please explain to me how there can be varying degrees of coherence. If I could understand how that could be the case, maybe then I could rank which arguments for God are better or worse than others. But as it stands, asking what's the best argument for God is like asking which is the more accurate statement. all bachelors are married, or 2 plus 2 does not equal 4. I really don't understand how to rank those two statements in order of accuracy because they both make no sense whatsoever, and I see arguments for God the same way. They are all equally incomprehensible to me.
The problem of evil is better than my priest was mean to me when I was 5, or I had religious parents that never let me go out with my friends. One of those is going to be better than the other. So sometimes I'll try very hard with this. I'll say, well, what's the least bad argument you've come across? So sometimes I'll phrase that, what's the least bad one?
Now, when I've heard you do this on Catholic Answers Live, though, I've never heard a compelling response. I've just heard something that exposes them. And again, I'm not saying this of all atheists. There are obviously very intelligent atheists who are seeking the truth, I think.
Yeah, and I think we don't want to have these questions as like gotcha moments. It's more like, help me understand. Like, in order to say there's no good reasons to believe in something, you could either have not looked at the reasons and hence you haven't found any, or you've looked at the reasons and found them wanting.
In my case, I've looked at the purported reasons and failed to be able to even recognize them as reasons. The reasons I've encountered don't even rise to the level of being wanting.
Now, a retort to me might be, well, what's the best reason to believe in Bigfoot?
This is not really analogous because Bigfoot is a concept I can recognize as coherent, and there is empirical evidence of Bigfoot's existence. It's all evidence that is plausibly fake and not strong enough to overcome the amount of evidence that one would expect for such a creature, so it still isn't very convincing, but I'm much closer to believing in Bigfoot than I am to believing in God.
Yeah, and I think there's this idea that something, if something is, what they'll say is, I think, and I always want to get inside people's heads. So one thing, I think, honestly, Matt, I think many people are atheists because they think that if there were good reasons, they would be universally believed.
I think that if there were a being who is both all-powerful and omnibenevolent, and who established a perfect moral system, he would not just present evidence of his existence, he would create everybody being born knowing about and believing in him and his moral system. He would have created us to be morally infallible and not subject to the temptation to sin or deny his existence or the value of his moral system.
And like all the smartest scientists in the world, and we would all accept this, and that we would agree. But that's just not how it works with philosophical topics.
I agree that this is not how it works. And one of the reasons I find the notion of God to be nonsensical is precisely because if there were a morally perfect, all-powerful being, that is how it would work, at least with respect to moral topics. An all-powerful, morally perfect being would not allow people to be morally fallible, or allow them to have moral disagreements. I don't know how to square the existence of such a being with human moral conflict. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.